Awesome. Okay, so we're 4 minutes in. I'll go ahead and start the webinar. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Manara, the organizers of this webinar on how to create an inclusive environment for Palestinian employees. Manara is a social impact startup whose mission is to connect the top tech talent in the Middle East and North Africa to the best jobs in the world, with a focus on women and Palestine, especially Gaza. Most of our alumni work in Europe at companies like Google, Meta, and Amazon. My name is Tamana Faizi, and as Director of Marketing here at Manara, it's my pleasure to serve you as your host today. I'd like to acknowledge that these are very difficult times for us. We at Manara have loads of community members in Gaza whose lives are in danger right now, as is our co-founder's family. We also unfortunately have community members who've lost some of their family members in the past couple of weeks. Obviously, people's safety matters the most, and the purpose of this webinar is to help companies who have Palestinian, Arab, or Muslim employees on their teams to help them create a more inclusive environment by understanding their employees better. We understand it can be a very hard topic to have a productive conversation on, so it's my job to help facilitate that to the best of my abilities today. Naturally, as we are working with global tech companies, we expect that in this audience, we'll have both Israeli and Palestinians on their teams, and it needs to be a safe space for them to ask any questions or share their experiences. We also have Muslim Arabs attend this talk and Palestinians that feel nervous about their own jobs and want to ask and vent about their experiences. And we also want to make sure this is a safe space for them too. This forum is designed for learning and insightful exchanges. So I encourage you all to take part by asking questions and sharing your experiences in the chat, which we've made available to everyone. We do ask that nothing is quoted outside of this chat and shared externally. We hope that this is not necessary, but if we do see anyone engaging in any way that is disruptive to the goal of this webinar, I will remind them this is an educational forum. But if it becomes clear this isn't space for them, then I will ask them to leave. And lastly, please be mindful that the topics we're discussing today are very personal and maybe very profound for some of our panelists who are sharing their unique experiences and perspective to contribute to our collective understanding. They are not here to represent or speak on behalf of their employers. So I'd like to start now with introducing the panelists. Why don't we start with our own CEO and co-founder, Iliana Montag. Over to you.
Hi, everyone. So my name is Iliana. I'm half Polish, half American, born in Belgium. So no, I do not have any roots in the region. My story and my connection to the region started when I was 12 years old and asked my parents for Arabic lessons. I ended up starting to study Arabic when I was in high school. I was able to take classes at UC Berkeley. This is before September 11th, so nobody was really studying Arabic back then unless they had roots in the region or were working on a dig. And I studied Middle Eastern history and literature in university, and then eventually had no idea what to do with this interest and passion from a job perspective. The only jobs I could find were in government, and I was not interested in that. So I ended up joining Google. I'm from Silicon Valley, and it seemed like a good place to be when you don't know what you want to do for work. I'm going to fast forward. Eventually, I figured out how to combine my interests, which was tech, social impact, and the Middle East and North Africa, the Arabic-speaking region. And I moved to Amman, Jordan, on a Fulbright, lived there for a year, and then was recruited to launch the first startup accelerator in Gaza, Palestine, on a 4-month contract. I went for 4 months and I ended up staying for 2 years because what I discovered there changed my life. Some of the people there I met were the most passionate, incredible people I'd met in my entire life. I was living in Gaza for the weekdays and then in Jerusalem during the weekends, and I was able as an American to get in and out of Gaza easily, which was one of the reasons they had hired an American for that job, which meant that I could also go anywhere in the West Bank or in Israel or out of the country into Jordan, Dubai, etc. When I got back from Gaza, so I was there during the build up to the 2014 war. I was running my team there on the ground during the war, so I had that very close experience of that. But of course, never went through what my team went through or what my startup community went through. When I moved back to the United States, I kept thinking about what was the next thing that I could do for this region. And Manara was actually launched because my company was looking for high quality, diverse software engineering talent. I was working for Upwork and we could hire from anywhere. And almost all of our engineers were in Ukraine and Russia. And we were looking to diversify globally and also from a gender perspective. Our engineers were mostly men, and we were also looking for women. So Manara actually launched for business reasons to help companies connect to the talent in the region, and out of my passion for that region and knowledge of that region. My co-founder, Leila Abudahi, is from Gaza. She moved here after graduating from university, and her family is still there on the ground. And she, like many other women that I met in Gaza, were very surprised when they arrived to the West to see such few women in computer science. So one of the things that's really special about Palestine and the region more broadly is that women study technical fields at equal rates to men. And it's actually the only region in the world where girls outperform boys in high school math. So that is my background and why I launched Manara. And Manara essentially helps connect the top tech talent in this region to their dream jobs globally, including in Europe, United States, et cetera, whether remotely or for relocations. And with that, we will hand it over to the next panelist to intro themselves. Shahla, why don't you go next?
All right. I'm Shahla Matar. A little bit on my personal background. I am originally from Jerusalem, both sides of my family. My mom's side is particularly from Sheikh Jarrah, which made some headlines not too long ago. And my dad is from an area called Jabal Mukabbir, which is essentially the outskirts of Jerusalem. They're two very different families that I hail from. On my mom's side, it's the Nashashibi, which is very much politically, socially active. You'll see a lot of people who wrote literature and poetry and whatnot for the Palestinian cause for a very long time. And my dad's side is very much a refugee, peasant, and farmer family. So they grew up way more underprivileged than my mom's side. And they both saw the Palestinian experience from different lenses, despite not being very geographically far apart. Like many in the Palestinian diaspora, I've had a lot of touch points throughout my life, and my identity was crystallized in a very interesting way. I was born in Syria and raised in Saudi and educated in Canada, but I'm also an American Jordanian citizen. So in some ways, very fortunate and privileged. In other ways, very much lacking a clear core identity. I would say my connection to Palestine is slightly different. Growing up in Saudi as a female, I think I quickly developed a second-class citizen identity. It was very challenging. At the same time, I could not obviously have the Saudi passport as a thing. You couldn't immigrate to Saudi. That's not a legal option. So we Palestinians who grew up in the Gulf or in other countries that you can't actually become a citizen of are quite conscious of home and missing a homeland. So growing up, I was very much interested in politics and law. And when I took on my university degree, that's what I studied. I specialized in political science with a focus on the Middle East region. But I also majored in crime law and deviance, and I minored in sociology. Over time, I was lucky enough to also using my American passport to work between Jerusalem and Ramallah. Growing up, just as a side note, growing up, I spent a lot of time in Gaza throughout the summers because my grandparents used to live there. A part of my mom's side of the family were working in politics, and Gaza used to be the political powerhouse for Palestine at one point before it became Ramallah, and at some point it was in Cyprus, at some point it was in Tunisia. It was always a revolving door, if you like, in terms of where the political representatives sit. And we as a family just kind of followed my grandparents wherever they went. And so Gaza had a very special chapter growing up just by the water and having grilled corn on charcoal over the sand. Those are some of my most fond memories. forward to graduating, I've worked in law firms and with the PLO when I was between Ramallah and Jerusalem, very much funded by the Norwegian Refugee Council. My job was to use legal routes to try and address some of the very difficult facts on the ground, and there's way too many for us to list. After spending my short stint there, I was pushed out of the country permanently, so I can't go home anymore. And as part of that experience, I switched to tech because politics was no longer a safe ground for me to play in after experiencing administrative arrest. And hence from there, I tried, similar to what Eliana said, to combine my two worlds. I stumbled upon tech, and I'm not even sure you know, Eliana, but we crossed paths in my previous agency with Gaza Sky Geeks. And that in itself was my first intersection between the two. Eventually now I sit at a group of tech agencies, and my current remit is to take care of all of our Middle East and Africa region. And hence part of that effort recently has been to focus on how we can make that chunk of our global business feel just as included and taken care of and looked after in these trying times across group as a whole. Not sure who's trying to come in under me.
Thank you, Shala. Awesome. Mohammed or Josephine, please go ahead.
Okay, I'll go. Hi, everyone. My name is Mohammed Abu Jaffal. I'm the Technical Director and VP of Nemet Tamasuk, a software development company with offices in the UK, UAE, KSA, and Jordan. I'm here today not representing my company, but representing my own opinions. I have over 16 years of experience in the tech industry, working for local and international companies. I was born and grew up in Kuwait, but now I'm based in Jordan. Also originally from Palestine, Port Nablus to be specific. And I have family members in Gaza and the West Bank. I also hold a Palestinian ID, which allows me to visit West Bank only, not Gaza, which I do occasionally. For us Palestinians, the Palestinian cause is always on our mind. It's not just because what happened like a month ago. And Gaza in particular, not only because my wife is from there, but because Gaza is a special case. Because they have been living in a blockade for years, and sometimes in total blockade, like these days we're living in. Or even from previous wars. I'm not sure if you all know, but Gaza have been with war like in 2008, 2012, 2014, 2021, and 2022. I was always trying to find ways to help us as much as I could, or like help Gaza as much as I could. And since I'm in the IT field, I try to help before by securing freelancing jobs for people in Gaza. There was an old website called Nabish, which is lists Gaza talents, and I could hire for projects and pay them via Western Union. And a few years back, I came across Manara's pages on social media and really admired what you guys are doing, trying to secure jobs for Gazans and other communities in international companies, which gave them freedom to leave Gaza if they wished, even for a little bit. Because this is something I heard from many young people in Gaza. I mean, the chance to travel is actually a dream in Gaza. So that's why I decided to take place and help these Palestinians feel safe and secure whatever jobs they got so far by keeping their identity and also stay connected to their roots.
Brilliant. Thank you, Mohammed. Josephine.
Hi, everyone. My name is Josephine. I am originally Dutch, currently living in Portugal, and grew up also a little bit all over the world. My background is in helping startups around the world. I've been doing entrepreneurship development work since probably 2018. Previously worked at both Y Combinator and Google for Startups. And my story of getting involved with Palestinian ecosystem started in 2018 when I met someone, and I remember I asked him, it was at a tech conference, I asked him, where are you from? And he said, I'm from Palestine. And I remember distinctly the look on his face because he saw my reaction and he goes, do you know where Palestine is? And we had this really long discussion. And I remember so distinctly at the end of our talk, I said to him, I'm going to come and visit you. And that was it. And it took me 2 years before I was able to go to Gaza to visit him. But in that time, I spent so much of my personal and also work time starting to upskill myself and learn about the Palestinian ecosystem. And for anyone that starts to research, and I'm going to talk specifically about Gaza because that's where I would say the majority of my attention is, at least right now, is we all know some of the horrifying stats. When I started researching Gaza, I very specifically remember going on Google Maps and typing in Gaza and seeing the first picture that popped up that stuck in my mind. 80% of the people rely on international aid. It has one of the world's highest unemployment rate. Most of the water in Gaza is contaminated and undrinkable. As Mohammed mentioned, Gaza has been under blockade, entering probably its 16th year. And then to paradox that with when I visited for the first time, what I saw was one of the oldest and most beautiful places that I've ever been to, and I've been around the world, the most delicious strawberries and falafel that I ever tasted, and the most inspiring and resilient people that I have ever met. And specifically from an entrepreneurship angle, I've worked with founders from all over the world. I've worked with the best founders. Palestinians are some of the most resilient and hardworking and interesting people that I've ever met. And the big lesson that I've learned from both my time in the West Bank and Gaza is that character isn't really about who you want to be. It's about how you show up in face of despair. And to say that Palestinians are living under tough conditions is an understatement. Yet some of the most inspiring people that I've met are born and raised there. And personally, for me, one thing I'm really excited about, it was and is still the potential of the Palestinian startup ecosystem. And I spent a lot of my personal as well as work time working on developing that. And that's why this cause particularly is also, it's really emotional and important to me. I have friends in Gaza that, I'm praying for every day. I have friends in the West Bank that are also suffering tough times. And one thing I'll just say to everyone that's listening into this panel is I hear you and I feel you. And I'm really grateful that we're able to have this discussion and start to talk about some of the issues that are really, really important.
Yeah, thank you so much, Josephine, for sharing that. Safe to say we have a very interesting bunch of people here on the panel today. I'm really excited to hear more. So we'll dive right into it and go back to the objective of this webinar as to how can we create an inclusive environment for Palestinian employees across the world. And I know some of you already experienced some of these kind of situations. Why don't I ask you, Mohammed, what's your experience been since this past couple of weeks, and what support did you wish you could have had, or what feelings did you feel that maybe your team or anyone around you could have supported you better so that you can feel comfortable and seen?
Okay. Well, I'll start with something before this event happened. I mean, as I told you, I was said before, and everyone knows that the Palestinian cause has been going for like 75 years. And it's really not mentioned in any event, in any company, in any sport event. But when the Ukrainian-Russian happened, suddenly everything turns to allow it. I mean, in sports, in colleges, universities, and companies. So I thought to myself, this is it now. The door is open. The minute anything happens in Palestine, everyone will talk about it. But unfortunately, this didn't happen. I mean, from my own experience, my colleagues sent their prayers and told me how do you feel? How's your family? We pray for you. But I thought there's going to be more formal position from the company I worked with, especially that they was very firm in the Ukrainian-Russian conflict. And the idea that we had to ask them to send an email for us to like stand, I'm not talking about like to be a pro-Palestinian here or like, it's just pro-human actually. Just send a statement that we know your families are there, not only me, most of the team is from Palestine as well. And yeah, I think that would have made it a little bit different, that especially like less than 2 years ago, what happened with Ukraine at least will make it different for them to, or like more freely to express, instead of saying actually nothing, or just small comforting words during the meetings, or like in private Slack messages or things like that. And especially that not only my company, I mean all the companies has the diversity and inclusivity is one of their values. So in my opinion, in fostering inclusivity with international companies, I just think the inconsistency that some organizations play regarding inclusivity initiatives is essential. On one hand, we often see companies striving to promote LGBTQ+ inclusivity within regions and cultures where these topics might face cultural or religious resistance, as such as the Jordan or Palestinian, which is Arab and Muslim communities. While these efforts are commendable, I mean, and reflect a commitment to diversity and also inclusion, there is a pertinent question. I mean, why is the same commitment not applied when addressing the Palestinian issue? In many instances, we observe these companies going silent or on matters related to Palestinian, even though they are willing to navigate complex cultural landscape to advocate LGBTQ+. So this inconsistency in their approach can be really disheartening for Palestinian employees who feel that their own culture and political concerns are marginalized in comparison.
So, and how does that make you feel, like in the workplace? So how, because of these, do you feel that you are afraid to speak up? Like, what are you as a result?
I mean, we spoke up. That's why we got the email. I mean, we spoke up and everyone listened, and some of the team members also go beyond that and participated in protests and like learned more about the cause, which something very important. I mean, the people being silent, it doesn't mean that they don't care about it. It could mean simply that they have no clue what's going on because of the mainstream media and what they've been feeding them all these years.
I mean, I'm glad that you are able to speak up, but some of the messages that we're seeing and some of the things that we're reading is that a lot of our employees, or just around the world as well, they don't feel comfortable, they don't feel safe or confident speaking up. So what advice would you give someone who thinks, you know, their jobs are in sort of at risk for speaking up or in any way? Like, how could...
I've heard from friends of friends that some people already, we've seen that also in the news, some people got fired simply by speaking up. Journalists are losing their jobs, mostly from Palestinian origin as well, just because they made their opinion on Instagram, on their private social accounts. For employees as well, someone like posted that he didn't even spoke up. He got approached by a pro-Israeli employee that why he's silent and he's not supporting Israel. So it provoked him to speak up and say things about Palestine and about his cause. And eventually that got him fired as well. Wow. So my advice is maybe don't conflict with colleague. Instead, go to your management, go to your HR department, speak up. If you need the time off, just take time off. As I told you before, the main reason could be because they're clueless. They don't know what's going on. They only hear like one side story. So, and that in some cases that helped. I mean, speaking to HR, telling them that how you feel, that this could be addressed. Like in my case, we told them that we feel less of a human, sorry to say that, because no one addressed the issue like you addressed it when the Ukraine-Russian happened, and they simply sent the email, not the one we wished for, but at least they acted. Yeah, discuss it with your HR, with your management. Feel free to speak up, but at the same time, take care, and like, because some people really got hurt just wearing kufiyya, flagging the flag, Palestinian flag, which suddenly is banned, which also tells us too much about the actual freedom of speech in Europe and the States.
Thank you, Mohammed. I guess, Josephine, what would you say, some of the ways we can approach management, like even some of the language that we can use? A lot of the times, people are like you said, Mohammed, people are unaware. So how do we approach the situation, and what are the specific language or words we should be avoiding so that we're not coming across that it's a political issue? It's more of I'm a human being and I want to be heard and supported.
I want to echo what Mohammed said, and I think companies feel that they cannot, my sense is that companies feel sometimes they cannot issue these inclusive statements because they feel that they're taking a side by acknowledging Palestinian suffering, but it's actually having the opposite effect. And I think people feel that they have to take a side, but this isn't actually about taking sides. And I think I have a more unique perspective on it because I've worked in both Israel and Palestine, and people ask me all the time, what side are you on? I think that drama is something that people are talking about a lot now. And what I say is I'm on the side of pro-human. I'm on the side of acknowledging that when there's human suffering, we need to acknowledge it and we need to do better. And what I say to companies, and I have examples of people that are at companies or at universities where they've had these issue statements, and there's been acknowledgement of the suffering on the Israeli side, and there hasn't been anything acknowledged on the Palestinian side. And I think the point about that Mohammed made about education is, I think, one that you have to start with. You have to start with the assumption of there's a lot of people, and I was one of them when I first started learning about Palestine in 2018. I spent a lot of time to try to understand the history and the story. And we all know that it's very difficult sometimes to get to the truth of what's happening. It's very, very difficult. So I think there's a lot of education that needs to be done. For example, the conflation of Palestinians with Hamas, misunderstanding of the history of the Palestinian people. So what I would really say to companies that are issuing these statements or thinking about the language is recognize that there are innocent people everywhere. Recognize that there are people that are suffering as a direct consequence of actions that are being taken. And there's really simple things that you can do. And one thing I think that's unique about this, and just the fact that every human being is unique, is not everybody needs the same support. 2 Palestinian employees in the US working at the same company in the same divisions might need very different support. One of them might want to totally disconnect from work and just focus on thinking about their family. Another employee might actually welcome the distraction and want to pour themselves into work and want to talk about them. One employee might want to talk every day about what's going on. Another employee or another person doesn't want you to ask them, how are you? Because there isn't really a good answer. And that's one general piece of advice I would say to everyone that's listening. It's really always well intended to ask, how are you or how are you doing? But there isn't really a good answer to that. So the way that I've done it and the way that I speak to Palestinians, it's just acknowledging that you're thinking of them. It's acknowledging that you're praying for them, that you're hoping for them. And it's just realizing that everybody wants different things. And this is what I would say to companies in the language that they use, is let the employees tell them what they need, but give them options, whether that's you're allowed to go and, use company time to join a protest, or you tell me day by day what your work schedule is going to look like, because maybe you want to be up at specific hours to communicate with your family in the West Bank or in Gaza. Maybe it's that you don't want to talk about personal work when you're on a one-to-one with personal feelings when you're on a one-to-one with your manager. It's really just giving people the options, but at the same time, it's not being silent and not doing anything, because otherwise people feel that they don't even have the power or they're too afraid to speak up. So I do think that companies need to be able to make a stance, but then let the employees go and tell them how they can best be supported during this time.
Absolutely. Thank you, Josephine. I guess just following on from that, does Ileana, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in and love everything that's been said so far. A few things that I would add to that is, if you are not from the Middle East, and then basically the term that we use is ally, right? That you're an ally to your college. This is a common term used in a lot of other situations. And because people feel so scared sometimes and so at risk of their jobs being lost if they speak up and say that their country is under occupation, which is, just a fact, right? And or anything else right now, then for you as an ally, you might be safer. You might be able to say things that they might not feel comfortable saying. And so I think it's really important that you take the time to educate yourself. I remember when I was studying Arabic for all those years, I actually avoided Palestine because I thought if I start learning about Palestine, I'm going to have to learn about the Israel and Palestine issue, and I'm going to have to take sides, and I hate politics, and I hate it when people don't call it up. So I just avoided it. I went to Morocco, Egypt, and never planned to go to that part of the region. So I get it. It's maybe not what you wanted to do, but especially if you have employees on your team from the region, then they're going through a lot right now, and it would mean a lot to them if you could get yourself educated outside of asking them, by the way, because they have enough emotional work going on right now. So unless they are offering you information, you might not want to go up to them and ask them directly. It might actually make them feel unsafe or just create an emotional burden for them when they already have enough to deal with right now. But educating yourself and taking on a little bit more responsibility about speaking up. Like if you haven't seen your company issuing a statement and you know that there's people at the company who are hurting right now, or if you see somebody working on a statement and working on it, but writing something that's going to be very alienating to a portion of the company's employees or contractors. I actually have a friend who wrote to me recently to say that she has heard that she's on the DEI committee, and she saw that they were working on a statement that was basically condemning anti-Semitism. The statistics show right now that there's both anti-Semitism happening at a rise and Islamophobia happening at a rise, and that's dangerous. And if we issue statements that are only highlighting one of those, then we are potentially contributing to that danger. And so she jumped in and made sure to help the DEI committee create a more inclusive statement. So just be aware that your colleagues who are from the region may feel, especially anyone who's Palestinian, may feel really nervous speaking up, that their jobs might be at stake sometimes if they do speak up. And so be thoughtful of that and help out as an ally. The other thing is, at a company, if you're getting yourself educated on this the first time, you might be hearing all kinds of words that might feel triggering to you or to some of your other colleagues on the team. Because whenever people start talking about the humanitarian issues, there's no way not to talk about the occupation of Palestine or everything that has happened in the past. And immediately those words start to sound political, and people might start to feel like it's confusing, and you might find yourself being nervous seeing some of what your colleagues are speaking about or saying. So for instance, Palestinians will often speak about martyrs. And for Americans, looking at a term like that might be really uncomfortable. And you might wonder, is it even appropriate to use that term, right? The word martyr in Arabic comes from the word to witness. And so it's also speaking about just witnessing the suffering, right? And so what I would advise you as a company right now is to be a little bit more open and lenient and get curious, as opposed to trying to create policy or judging what people say. And so if you hear words that are being said that you're not comfortable with, it, instead of going and shutting down an employee who's speaking like that, go and ask them questions and get curious and start to learn what those words mean to that person. If you are seeing that somebody at the company is using words that making somebody else at the company uncomfortable, and it can go in either direction, then talk to them about it and ask them how it could possibly be phrased in a way that wouldn't make others as uncomfortable, because you do ultimately want to just focus on work at your company right now, right? It is ultimately a place of business. So if it's starting to get out of hand, then have conversations individually instead of immediately going to some kind of big statement about what is or isn't allowed, or trying to, assume that a employee meant something really bad when maybe they didn't. Maybe they just are using the words that are commonly used in their environment, and they don't realize that to somebody else those words could be uncomfortable.
Thank you, Liana. Shala, would you like to add anything? Do you have any tips or your own experience story that you'd like to share with us?
Yeah, so everybody touched upon different bits of it. I'll speak a little bit about my personal approach that I find had worked for me recently and in past years. It doesn't necessarily fit in every business culture, but there's definitely some takeaways from it. I'll also allude to a couple of examples that I've seen through my network that I didn't experience personally. One thing I've realized over the years is that there's definitely power in numbers. So generally speaking, the fewer there are Palestinians or Arabs or Muslims within the company, the more challenging it's going to be catered to. The bigger the team that represents this region or identity, the more incentivized the company will be to deal with the situation or address it. In our case, we have an entire office in Jordan, for example, and that entire team is either Palestinian or has very close relatives and friends in Palestine. There's definitely more urgency around addressing something like that than if you're sitting in DC and, out of 200 employees, you have 2 originally Palestinian employees who are actually American citizens, and you're not even sure what exactly they are. So I would say this is something where intersectionality really makes a difference. And we're actually seeing that in protests. We're seeing it in the way the narrative shift is happening, whether it's online or at the workplace. But finding others that sit in your camp, whether directly or indirectly, is crucial at this time. And that's, I think, how you could overcome the numbers limitation. If there's a bunch of other Palestinians, I'm a huge fan of organizing, right? Mobilize your team, get together, and you're going to have a much more loud voice, if you like. Unify the message, have one clear ask, have a representative, and do it properly in a way that's agreed upon. And this kind of forces the company to listen and leaves less room for them to ignore, escape, or look the other way. If you're not in a situation where you can guarantee that, as Ileana mentioned, there are other allies that would still back you up just based on value system and principles. In this case, for example, any indigenous peoples that's been colonized in history, any marginalized minority that feels that there's any kind of racism or phobia around their ethnicity or their religion, or really xenophobia of any sort. Gather all these marginalized minorities and come together, because there will be a day that different parts of that group are going to need you to be their ally. And then you start to come off as less of a minority and more of a bloc that needs to be taken seriously and needs to be properly considered. Otherwise, it's a business issue, right? At the end of the day, in my opinion, as long as the business can more or less avoid dealing with it, the more they can be left in their comfort zone, the less likely the business will act, because, as Ileana said, it is a place of business. So as much as we can kind of remove the headache, the better. But once that headache becomes real and could impact the actual business, I feel like that message becomes taken way more seriously. Mm-hmm. So that's, if I have space, I have a couple of other bullets that I found practically helpful. Once you gather your people, it's always good to have a senior champion. So it does make a difference who is sitting where in the hierarchy of the business, right? So the higher up you go, if you have somebody who is an ally, who sits at board level or who's at C-suite, it's more on that person to take a louder stance than the rest, because they hold a heavier weight around the table and they have access to a more powerful platform. And unfortunately, but it is a fact, they will be taken more seriously. So it's not just the constituency that's making noise, but it's leadership making noise too. And I think it's those people who end up taking less risk if they're louder and end up being the champion voice for the rest of the group of people that have already mobilized themselves. Because in this forum, we're particularly talking about North America and Europe, the West in general, it is important to also enable ourselves as employees and people who are representing this group of people to speak the right language. It's unfortunate that sometimes, kind of Josephine was saying and Eliana was saying, the business needs to learn the language of the employee. And yes, in the ideal scenario, that is true. But I feel like also in the same vein of education, sometimes it's easier to teach somebody in their own language. So speaking of terms like occupation is not as common as colonization, for example, right? It's not as common as apartheid, all of which check the boxes in the Palestinian cause. So even the narrative, for it to be easier for the company to understand, it means we do need to speak in Western terminology, common Western terminology. At the same time, tapping into your HR department, which has this as part of their job description one way or another, to make sure that the workplace is a comfortable, inclusive, diverse place, and kind of call them out on their own value system. Call out your company on the values that they remind you of in every all-in-company meeting that they stand on, and tell you, this is what we stand for as a company. Just regurgitate the same exact values and ask for it to be shown in practice. I've had a friend of mine, actually, just a couple of days ago, who had a conversation in her workplace that she ticks off 4 of their minority check boxes in one hire, right? But when it's time for those same check boxes to be taken care of, then the company tends to shy away from it. So HR and the company as a whole, if they're taking inclusion and diversity seriously, they need to understand that we don't come here just to check off your boxes. There's work that you need to do to earn those boxes to be checked off. And that's exactly how you end up claiming, diversity and inclusion.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Thank you, Shala. Very well put together. I guess you've all mentioned separately that, the best thing you can do is educate yourself. So, with so much noise out there, what would you recommend? Or do you have any sources people can go to start educating themselves that's not overwhelming? And a question to the audience, would you benefit from learning more about the history of Palestine? Would you benefit from another webinar, for example? So I'll put a poll out while Shala, and this is anyone else on the panel that'd like to answer that question.
Shahla, did you have something you wanted to share in terms of, no? Okay. One of my favorite books is Gaza Footnotes, or Footnotes in Gaza by Chris Sacca. It is a kind of comic book history. And I think it just brings to life very vividly what it's like to live there and some of the history and the background. It's kind of scary how much a lot of that is repeating itself right now.
Thank you, Eliana. Okay, so we now have about 10 minutes for some Q&A. So I'm just going to read out some of the questions. One of the questions that's come up is, we don't have a hate problem at my company. How do we explain the difference between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism when addressing the idea of preventing hate at work? It's a heavy, tough one.
I can jump on this because I had to deal with this for the last few weeks, unfortunately, several times. I immediately tried to disarm that entire angle by just saying, can we not talk about religion? This has nothing to do with religion. Absolutely not. Once you open the door for religion and politics, as that umbrella encompasses, it's almost impossible for the company to find a comfortable way to deal with this, right? So a quick way to disarm it is to take the humanitarian angle. That's what I've been doing here. It doesn't matter where you stand. 11,000 people slaughtered without water, food, and electricity or fuel. who are now in danger of dying just from dehydration and starvation, is a humanitarian cause. It is not a political cause. It is not a religious one. It is not complicated. It's purely a genocide. So in this particular case, I would focus on the clear humanitarian cause. In other cases of the past, fortunately for everyone, we're seeing a lot of Jewish people rise and say, Zionism does not represent us. Zionism and Judaism and even being Israeli are different, because I personally know people in Israel who are anti-Zionist, who don't feel like the government represents them, and who don't believe in the Zionist regime, and who would like to see one state for everybody. They're not the majority, but they're still there. So to very much, and one last thing, interesting thing, Arabs are Semites themselves. So it's very strange. It's like telling, you know, somebody of a certain race that you're racist against that race. I mean, it's possible, I guess, but it just sounds really funny.
Yeah, thank you.
I would like to make a suggestion here that responds a little bit to that and a little bit to some of the comments that I see being posted to hosts and panelists, which is focus on sharing people's stories, because for people who are not already interested in Palestine, hearing terms like this is just scary, honestly. Like I used to shut down my hearing. It used to go off when I would hear terms like occupation, colonizer, you know, anti-Semitism, Zionism, from the river to the sea. You lost me. Like I would not want to talk to you if you say something like that. And so I can actually relate a little bit to the audience that you're trying to speak to. What really changed things for me was being on the ground and seeing what's actually happening. And so, first of all, on that note, a big part of what I've done in the past, and I encourage everybody to do, is try to bring more people to Palestine. Not right now, potentially, but when things calm down, it's unfortunately people are going to view it as a very dangerous place after all the news that they're seeing now. Most of the time, it's not a very dangerous place, and you can go. And a lot of companies will be sending people to Israel anyways for if they have employees there. What you can do is, if you hear of somebody traveling there, invite them to hop over the border and come to Palestine. Or if your company, you know, has Palestinians on the ground in Palestine, invite them to come and meet you there. And this, by the way, is how a lot of the funding that has gone to the Palestinian ecosystem started originally. Is a Googler was running an event in Tel Aviv to encourage more developers to use Google back in the day before Google even had an office there. And someone from Palestine reached out and said, I heard you're going to be in Tel Aviv. Why don't you come to Ramallah too? And they saw what they saw, and then they got tons of funding from Google to go towards building the Palestinian ecosystem because of being so impressed with what they saw, right? So invite people, show pictures of what it's actually like. I remember at Manara, we once posted a picture of our alumni or our participants having a pizza meetup, and Paul Graham wrote to us and said, Paul Graham, you know, one of the most famous investors in the world, our first investor, he wrote and said, I've never seen a picture like this of Palestine. Like all I see is the, you know, walls and bombs and everything. So share more pictures of the beautiful cafes on the sea in Gaza so people can start to really relate to this place. And share personal stories. If you have your own, share them. People listen to that and can relate to it and connect in a way that they can't with something else. If you don't have your own personal stories, elevate other stories that you see being shared online. So that's one thing. And then just want to really make sure to say before we wrap up, because I know we're running out of time soon, this is a completely different topic, but if you have employees or contractors in Gaza and you have questions about how to support them right now, here's a few very quick tips. Number one, send salary for 3 months in advance if you can. Definitely make it clear to them their salaries are not being cut. If you can, send it in bulk in advance, because people are sometimes concerned about being able to receive payments, and there's just a lot of desperation and need right now. Number two, of course, express that you're thinking of them. Know that at times connectivity is so bad that people are not going to be able to respond, but they'll still appreciate it when they get it. Don't ask how they're doing. They're doing like shit. It's dangerous. Almost everyone I know has lost their house, and a lot of people have lost family, and are, you know, nobody can be safe anywhere in Gaza right now. So don't ask things like that, but let them know that you're thinking about them, and that if there's anything at all that at any point they need that you can help with, that you're ready. And then be ready to support all kinds of crowdfunding campaigns once things stabilize. Right now, if you're trying to help your employees get out of Gaza, it's very hard to figure out how to do that if they don't have dual citizenship. We are very closely monitoring the situation and trying to do some things in the background. If we hear of something that's working, we'll be some of the first to know, potentially in the next 24 hours. So contact Manara on DMs if you have any questions about how to facilitate payments. By the way, I saw we had a question about that. We send payments to Palestine using a company called Plane. I just posted it, similar to Deal, Remote, et cetera, but they're very inclusive globally, and they've always supported Palestinian like payments to Palestine, and we're not having any trouble getting money through. But if you are having trouble getting money through, also DM us on social media. We've actually helped a lot of people whose accounts through Wise got shut down and they weren't able to access their savings. We've been helping them access their savings. We've had contacts with Wise and other companies. We haven't dealt with Payoneer yet, which has also shut down payments to a lot of Palestinians, but we will get there if we see that there's a need to. So please DM Manara on LinkedIn or on other social media accounts if you hear of specific situations where people need help accessing payments.
Brilliant. Thank you, Liana. I think that's all we have time for. So I'd like to thank you all for participating, our panelists for sharing their experiences and their personal views, and to all our participants asking questions. There's been quite a few questions around, sources and accounts or news outlets that we should really be following. We will be sharing a list of accounts and media that we vetted and we think that it's from the ground. So we will be sharing that after the webinar, probably next week, with the link to the recording as well, so you can share it with your network and your colleagues and employees. And on that note, thank you so much, and thank you for joining. Hopefully we'll be seeing you at the next one. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, and thank you to our panelists.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Manara. Thank you, guys. Take care.
Bye.